Two possible endings, the saddest scene in Greek myth, and Odysseus on the big screen. Join me and my guest Lottie Luke as we discuss The Return on the Ancient History Hound podcast. Hi and welcome, my name's Neil, and in this episode I'm joined by a special guest to discuss The Return. It's a movie that you may have heard about. It's based on the Odyssey, or at least the end of the Odyssey, and specifically when Odysseus returns to Ithaca. My guest is Lottie Luke, the creator behind My Classics Portal. This is a platform on TikTok, YouTube and Instagram where she shares bite-sized history videos and language tips. Lottie graduated in classics from the University of Birmingham and has since then started creating accessible resources for students of Latin and ancient Greek, all on her website, My Classics Portal. More recently, she has focused on archaeology and recent discoveries. As you'll hear, we had a great chat about the film and how it worked in relation to the original poem. We discuss elements of the poem which are included in the film and some which aren't. We even get to answer some questions which you kindly sent in. Thanks again for those. Now, you'll hear us both mention it in the episode, but it would be great to hear your thoughts on what we discuss. And you can obviously get Lottie on My Classics Portal on the places I've mentioned. Just search for her. As for me, well, I'm Ancient Blogger on X, Instagram, Blue Sky and YouTube, with a growing subreddit on Reddit called Ancient History Hound. There's also my ancientblogger.com website. One final thing though, we do discuss some quite nasty events which take place in both the poem and the film, so just bear that in mind. Well, I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I did chatting with Lottie. Hello to everyone listening. This is a first for me in two senses. The first is that I'm having a film review, and this is also the first time I'm joined by Lottie Luke. Welcome, Lottie.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about the film.
I came across your content on TikTok where you're My Classics Portal, and you had done a series actually on the Odyssey and summarising the different books. And you're on Instagram as well. Can you just give us an overview of My Classics Portal?
Yeah, of course. So I initially set up the website, My Classics Portal, and the initial aim really was to help GCSE students who study Latin and ancient Greek and provide resources. It was some of my favourite subjects at school, so I felt it would be nice to sort of pass that on to other people, even if they weren't studying an exam, but people maybe sat at home that wanted to just do it alongside work or whatever and start teaching themselves. So I started doing these resources, and then I didn't really know what to do with them. So that's when I started doing videos online and talking about ancient history and archaeology. And that's how My Classics Portal was born, really. Basically from the fact that I was worried that once I'd started a job that wasn't history related, I'd forget all about my language stuff. So I decided to do it this way, I guess.
There are a lot of people who have ancient history as something they've really, really grown to like and enjoy, but have other jobs. I've met so many people. I never say the dreaded words, I have a podcast. But I say, oh, my thing's ancient history. And they go, yeah, I studied classics, or I studied ancient history. And that's why I really like what your content's about, because again, it is about supporting people, getting them into the subject. You mentioned that Latin was the thing that got you into ancient history.
So I wouldn't say forced, but it was sort of compulsory that you had to study Latin at my school. And so I did it, and I ended up being quite good at it, but I never really dabbled in the history side of the classical world. Obviously, when you're studying the languages, you get little nuggets of history, but not the full picture. So it wasn't up until A-level that I decided, you know what, I want to do a bit of ancient history. So I did that, and then, thought, you know what, I'm going to stick at this. So then I ended up studying classics at university. So, sometimes people are surprised when I say that actually my favourite area is languages, when a lot of my content is archaeology based. So I think people assume, oh, you must do archaeology, that must be your favourite part. But no, it's the Latin and the Greek.
I try to do either. So if people are listening and wonder what the difference is between somebody who studies ancient history and a classicist is someone who's done languages. So they've studied Greek or Latin. And I remember at university, I loved trying to learn Greek. I was awful at it. I'd really enjoy it. It wasn't because I didn't like it, but whenever I tried to translate anything, I just got it horrifically wrong. In the end, I decided to drop it. But it was one of the things I would have loved to have sort of got more into. But yeah, that was something that I wasn't very good at. But today we're talking specifically about film. So we both went to see or have seen the film The Return. I just want to quickly talk about how that came to be, how the film manifested. So the director is Umberto Pasolini, and apparently 30 years ago or so, he came up with this script and he decided that he would like to produce it, looked around, and he met up with Ray Fiennes, who apparently he knew. And after he saw Ray Fiennes in Coriolanus, he thought, there's a guy who could direct and star, and he could be the lead in my film. Well, apparently that didn't quite work out in the sense of, I think Fiennes says that he found it too much to do both things. And eventually, after haranguing him for a number of years, the two decided, yeah, we're going to make this work. Fiennes would be Odysseus and Pasolini would direct. They then got Juliette Binoche, who stars as Penelope. And actually those two Ray Fiennes and Juliette Binoche had played opposite each other when Binoche had won an Academy Award in '96 for The English Patient. So they were well aware of each other's work. Fiennes has said in a few interviews that the minute they had Juliette Binoche on board, he knew it was going to be a great film. And she is great in the film. In fact, they all are. The filming started in the spring of 2023 in Corfu and Italy. But interestingly, the Palace of Odysseus is on mainland Greece. It's in the southwest of the Peloponnese, and it's in a region called Elis. And it's a castle which doesn't even date to the BC period. It's actually, the castle is the Clemuzzi Castle, and it was built in AD 1223. So from the outset, this wasn't intended to be, and I think anyone who's seen the film would realise, these aren't lavish sets. These aren't really big, ostentatious sets. And likewise with the costumes, and that was a decision which was taken very early on by the director. Pasolini said that he didn't want anything taking away from the characters. He didn't want people wearing ostentatious clothes. He didn't want a really sort of lavish set or anything. And I think that sort of works, certainly sets the mood for the film, because I found it to be, well, actually, Lottie, how did you find the film?
I really enjoyed it. It took me by surprise, but I thought it was quite a fresh perspective on Odysseus' story. I think it's definitely a slow burner, and I can imagine a lot of people watching it who maybe don't know the poem's plot finding it quite slow.
Yeah.
But I just loved how it sort of took it from the psychological perspective and how there's a lot of emotional trauma that Odysseus would have held, rather than this great heroic man that the poem presents him to be. I really enjoyed it though.
I don't want to say it's more cerebral because that sounds snobby, and I'm not a film person by any standards, but it is more about the manifestation of guilt, trauma. In fact, I would go so far as to say, and I said it in one of my TikToks, that if you're someone who's suffered combat trauma, not being a psychologist or therapist or anything like that, I think that you would need to know that going into watching the film, because it is about grief. It's about carrying the war with you. And there's a great line. I mean, there are many great lines in it, but one of them is, I see war everywhere.
Yeah.
Odysseus just hasn't gotten over. He's not this, I can drop everything and do something heroic. He's someone suffering throughout the film. And we'll get to that. I think one of the points we want to cover is how Odysseus is so different to his depiction in the poem. But talking about the poem, I think it would be a good idea, and bearing in mind all the great work that you've done recently on TikTok, and also to get me off the microphone, if you could just talk about the poem and the events that the film covers and how they sort of correspond, as it were, to the poem. So just talk us through perhaps what happens in the poem that's covered in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. So this narrative period spans from around book 13 to book 24 of the Odyssey. And after 20 years away, Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca after leaving Phaeacia. And he is initially disguised as a beggar with the help of Athena. the goddess. And the suitors have essentially taken over his home, all hoping to marry Penelope, Odysseus' wife. So Athena ends up telling Telemachus to come back from Sparta, and Odysseus and his son reconnect, and they begin plotting with some of his loyal servants like Eumaeus, the swineherd. Eventually, they enter the palace. Odysseus is still in disguise, and Penelope still has no idea who he is. And he gets a lot of grief from the suitors. They mock, abuse him, particularly Antinous, the leader, I guess, of the suitors.
Yeah, he's the head baddie in the poem.
And they also, Odysseus and Telemachus are hiding weapons, preparing for later on. Then you have a scene where Odysseus' old nurse, Eurycleia, recognises him by a scar when she's bathing him, but he quickly tells her to be quiet. And then the suitors are still behaving arrogantly, and then we get signs from Zeus, some omens showing that justice is on the way, and Penelope announces the challenge. So whoever can string Odysseus' bow and shoot through 12 axe heads will marry her. And obviously the suitors all fail, and it's Odysseus who wins. And then finally he reveals himself and goes on a mad killing spree with his son. It's very brutal and graphic and gory, and then even the disloyal maids are killed in the poem, which is, I think, is an interesting area that they obviously didn't put in the film.
No.
And then we end with Penelope finding out that Odysseus is back, but she's still unsure, so she tests him one last time, asking about their marriage bed and saying that she will get the bed moved, which of course it can't move as it forms part of a tree, which is rooted into the ground. And Odysseus passes the test, leading to an emotional reunion. And that's about roughly the time span that the film does from the poem.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing about what the film does, because it stops at a particular point when they reunite and they go to bed. And in the discussion, I watched a discussion with the director, and he sort of said that the reason that he did that is because that's where, for him, the narrative makes sense finishing. And this is really quite an interesting thing generally, because there is a debate as to whether everything that happens after this point was an addition. And this debate isn't a new one. There were two scholars from the Library of Alexandria in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC who posited this idea that the stuff that goes on after that into Book 24, and obviously finishing the poem, was a later addition. And that's still debated. But it is an odd section. And I just want to go over some of the things that occur in there, because you've got this great narrative that's come to its conclusion. And then what happens afterwards is Odysseus works out that things are still really, really quite tense. He's just butchered a bunch of people. They're not going to be happy about it. All the relatives won't be. And so he basically escapes or hides. He has Athena cloud him, and him and Telemachus and a couple of the loyal stewards get armed, and they go and see Laertes, his father. And that's a recognition scene there. But even then, Odysseus is doing something really quite... Well, he doesn't come across particularly well, because he pranks his dad. He doesn't tell his dad. He seems to want to test his dad. And now I have read an article, or rather an argument years ago, suggesting that this was actually symbolic, because what Odysseus was doing was trying to sound out from the more senior demographic whether or not they'd support him. So if you think of, for example, power structure, where you have sort of a group of elders, he wanted to make sure they're on side as well, which is why he does the testing thing. And that got boiled down to the symbolism of Laertes. It was an interesting argument. Make of it what you will. There's some real black humor with the suitors, because the suitors are taken to the underworld. The spirits of the suitors are taken to the underworld by Hermes, who says they are chattering around him like bats. And they're making this like weird sound. Squeaking like bats. They then go into the underworld, and one of the suitors bumps into Agamemnon. And Agamemnon says, "I recognize you, you're the son of a friend, etc., etc. What are you doing down here?" The suitor then sort of says, "Well, it had nothing to do with us. I mean, we were completely innocent. We were just hanging around this palace. We have Penelope, who's just trying to trick us all the time. At which point you've made the fatal error Because if you ever are in the underworld and if you ever get talking to Agamemnon, do not bring in relationships, because he just goes on about, he then straight away starts talking about, well, that's Odysseus for you. He's got a good wife, a loyal wife. Well, would you look at me? And he just goes on. And this is something that sort of generally occurs in the Odyssey.
Yeah.
There's an earlier meeting where Odysseus is able to engage with Agamemnon. It's not clear if it's in the underworld. It's sort of a bit of a grey area, but he talks to him, and Agamemnon then talks about his wife and how angry and disloyal she was and how annoyed, all that. And I kind of get it at that point, but by this point you're thinking you need to move on a bit, mate. It's done.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have that, and then it gets a bit. I think it gets clumsy, and I've never written poetry apart from a brief stint when I was 13, and the greatest thing I've done in my contribution to humanity is get rid of that poetry. So I'm not going to compare myself to anyone who's even written a poem of any great note. Odysseus then realizes that he's got this group that are really disgruntled with him. They're sort of led by Eupythes, who's the father of one of the suitors, who makes a really good point. He says there's a group of them, and he's sort of rallying them. And he says, well, look, he's taken a group of young men away. They're not here anymore. He's then come back, and he's taken out another generation of young men. We're obliged to avenge, which in a way you kind of see his point. And so the two groups, so on one hand you've got Odysseus, Telemachus, Laertes, and a couple of his sort of loyal servants that are all armed. You have the sort of families, as it were, should we say this, the mob turning up, led by Eupythes. And Athena appears as mentor, as she did in the hall, which when she appears next to Odysseus, and she talks to Laertes, and she says to him, Laertes, go on, throw your spear at that guy over there. I'll give you the energy. And he does. And so they haven't even been able to talk this through. And Laertes throws this spear, goes through the head of Eupythes, and then Odysseus just breaks rank and starts carving people up. And then Athena, as mentor, goes, whoa, chilly boots, Odysseus. We need to calm this down.
Yeah.
Well, okay, perhaps don't wind up the senior figure with a spear. Don't put ideas into his head. And then she tells him, you must strike peace with the rest of the people here. Odysseus goes, okay, end of poem.
Yeah.
It's
bizarre.
It is. And I think that if you were to compare that ending to the earlier ending, where you got the two reunited, perhaps I'm just a sucker for a nice, tidy, romantic ending, or what you might want to call it. But I can see what people might think of that. And again, if you've got any thoughts on that, it'd be interesting for people who are listening to let us know, let you know. But yeah, it doesn't seem as the other ending does seem. I think that's where the debate is. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
I think there's two ways of looking at it. In a way, it sort of makes sense that Athena sort of plays a part in at the end, because she's done a lot through him, guiding Odysseus through this whole journey, that maybe it's Homer's way of just going, here, let's sling Athena back in at the end just to help you right at the end, so she's sort of finished it off for you. But in another way, I also think that because the massacre of the suitors is so brutal, that maybe Homer's looking at it thinking, can we end it on that? Is that quite a extreme ending?
Yeah.
And maybe we need to soften the blow a little bit and just add a bit on the end, maybe a reflection.
That's a really good point, because I suppose you would think, what happens next?
Yeah.
Because it is brutal. I mean, you spoke about the maids. I think it's one of the most chilling lines in any Greek poem or tragedy or anything, when he talks about what he's going to do with the maids who've been disloyal. Eurycleia goes and gets them, and there are 12 of them. And note that number 12, because I want to come back to something in a moment about that. They're forced to come in and clean up all the gore. Yeah. They're then taken out into the courtyard, where initially Telemachus says, we'll just chop them up. But then he says, no, that'd be too nice of me. So they get hung. And they are hung on a single cord that's, I think, between a column and another column. And Homer has it that their feet twitch for a while, but not long. And it's just, that's so cold. That's just unnecessary. Well, I say unnecessary. This is obviously Greek epics, so perhaps that's part and parcel. But it's really brutal. And the reason I come up with 12 is because it was one of those things I was thinking about popped into my head. It's one of the things you may not know or sometimes gets looked over is that in the Iliad, you have the funeral games of Patroclus. And there's a very weird thing which occurs there. And some people have argued that it's actually because it belonged to an older custom that was passed down and then referred to and picked up. Because there are things in the Odyssey, for example, the pit that Odysseus digs in order to converse with the dead is very similar to Hittite pit rituals. So there could be that there are cultural influences and artifacts, as it were, that have been left over in the Odyssey and in the Iliad. And that's a fascinating idea. And in the Iliad, at the funeral for Patroclus, 12 Trojan princes are sacrificed. It's just a line. Blink and you'll miss it. There's a whole bunch of animals that get sacrificed, but he also then has 12 Trojan princes. Now, I don't know if 12 has got some symbolic number.
Yeah.
I know that some numbers work well within the cadence of the poetry. So it might just be that was just a good number. And some people have argued, well, 12 is quite a lot. It's not a small number, but it's not a huge number. It's a believable number.
Yeah.
And that made me immediately think about that. I did find it a tough watch at points.
Yeah, I was the same.
Probably one of the things that have got people talking the most about this film is the lack of gods. So there are no gods involved in this whatsoever. And that was a decision that Pasolini made from the outset. Apparently, when he first came out with this concept, the idea, no gods. And the reason for that, and it makes sense, is because he wanted the responsibility, the moral conundrums, the sort of emotional landscape of it all to be fully on the shoulders of individuals, people, mortals, rather than a god saying, yeah, you can do it like that. Don't worry about it. If a god's involved, perhaps they write you that kind of moral check that you can get away with doing something. However, he wanted to make this a story much more about Odysseus, much more about how he dealt with things. Also, how Penelope deals with things as well, because it is important to remember that she has to deal with a lot and she's trying to work things out. How did that fit for you, the fact that there weren't any gods in the film?
I thought it really worked. I think by removing the gods, the film grounds everything in the human experience. So it's no longer about fate or the justice of the gods. It's about people, their trauma and memories of war. And I think the struggles that Odysseus faces are no longer mythic trials anymore. They are internal trials. He's not being tested by the gods, but he's being tested by guilt and emotions, I guess. I think it also shifts how we interpret the story. Like you said, the gods often are a bit of an excuse if something goes wrong.
It
was the gods' fault. So I think that moral clarity is sort of gone, and it's a bit murkier. You can't just pass off the blame to the gods. It's all about you and your actions. So yeah, I think some people might wonder maybe whether the film not having the gods makes the story feel a bit empty. But if anything, I thought it felt more real and more tragic. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think you summed it up brilliantly there. I think that there is a real case for when you make a film like this and you want to do that, you have to get the right actors in. I don't think Fiennes is absolutely superb. There are moments where he's just holding a look at the camera and you can see the turmoil. And you see, if you're going to do something like this, you've got to have the right people in the right roles to be able to carry that off.
Yeah.
I also think there's a couple of practical elements here. So the budget for the film was 20 million.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't get you much if you're going to start doing CGI. No. How do you start introducing gods? Because if you're going to do that, people are going to get annoyed because, I can't believe that this goddess who can turn herself into a swallow, can turn herself into a human, can turn herself into anything, is played by that actress.
Yeah.
Forums will boil with comments. I think you could still have had some acknowledgement, because much of what you speak about, the involvement of Athena's there doing everything. I mean, she's making people look really good. She gives Penelope a makeover. She gives Odysseus a makeover. She suggests that people do things. She's testing Odysseus all the way through.
Yeah.
When he's in the hall and he's having his big fight, she appears next to him as mentor, and then she says in the poem she doesn't want to help him. She wants to test him. So she turns herself into a swallow and flies up into the timbers and watches. So even then she's testing him. So again, this is a hero who's really being tested all the time. Without that, it can be a bit more different. You can do more things. The issue that I think I had there were a couple of scenes which didn't quite link in. I think if you don't have Ksenia, things are more complex. So for those that are listening, I hope I'm saying this right. Ksenia is essentially being a good guest and a good host. That's one of the real themes of the Odyssey. It's how you are as a host, how you are as a guest, and there are certain conventions that you do not breach. I always felt a bit sorry for Polyphemus because Odysseus does turn up to his cave, starts eating his cheese. He's not even there. But anyway, so when you take that away, when you lift that out of the film, the way the suitors are behaving can only be almost coded in them being bad people. There's also a scene with Laertes, because in the film, Laertes dies. He isn't met by Odysseus. And you have this moment, and I think the director acknowledged this. He knew that it was an anachronism. He's in his tomb, or being rested in his tomb, and one of the suitors comes in, knocks the body over, and he's got coins on his eyes, and he takes the coins. And obviously that's a nod to, look at this suitor, he's not even acknowledging the dead, because we need to keep banging that drum that the suitors are bad. Whereas if you have Ksenia as a staple and as an expectation, just them breaching that, they're in trouble. For the pedants, which I include myself in on this, but I accept that the director knew about this. First of all, a coinage doesn't appear really in the Homeric period. In fact, I think it's 7th century BC. It's the earliest Greek coin. So if there was an overlap, it's very small. The whole idea about putting coins on the eyes is much later. And in fact, when we refer to coins and the dead in ancient Greek, I suppose you sort of myth or worship, these were often found in the mouth. This isn't referred to until the 5th century BC. So it's actually in Aristophanes, where you have Chiron, who again is a figure who is in the Greek underworld, who doesn't appear on the scene until the mid or early 5th century BC. So people who, I've seen this, people who talk about the Greek underworld, and they're going, what was it like? It depends. When are you talking about? Because Hesiod and Homer do not mention Chiron. He's a kind of later addition. The whole idea of the ferryman, he comes on a bit later. The idea of having the coins, I couldn't find any reference to it in ancient Greek as being on the eyes. It would have been apparently an obol or some small coin in the mouth. In any case, so we know that's, I don't want to be that person, but I am sort of being that person. But I felt that was an unnecessary thing to do. I didn't, if you've got the gods involved, or at least the understanding that there's some piety or rules that are being broken, you don't need that scene. So
I agree. If you're removing the gods, you're removing the whole concept of the fact that, the coins surely aren't needed.
And then, of course, what you have to do is you have to link in the suitors with the degradation of society, which they're doing, because you see them nicking the coins, or one of them nicking the coins. One of them does something very, very unpleasant to an individual, which I won't go into. You'll see, if you know about it, you know. And they're just behaving really badly. And I think they're linked as well to the moral and social decay of the island. Everyone's poor, everyone's broken. The weather's used brilliantly, because if you think, this wasn't an advert for a Greek island holiday tour or retreat, the weather's you got horizontal rain, the winds, it doesn't look particularly nice. And that all links into presenting this place as being one which is at the edge. It's
weathered down.
Everyone just looks like they're an hour or two away from being very ill. It's not a particularly pleasant place. I suppose that brings us to Odysseus. What do you think of Odysseus? How does he compare? You mentioned it earlier. You said he's not the same. So how do you think he's different? What's he like in the film?
So he's not a hero as such, like you'd expect him to be from the poem. To me, he is a sort of haunted man. And I think the film strips away that mythic glory that surrounds the poem.
Yeah.
So Odysseus is exhausted, he's hollowed out, he's more shaped by war and trauma than this cunning characteristic that he is often associated with in the poem. I think he's also quite emotionally distant, even cold at times. Which I think makes the few moments where he's vulnerable land a lot harder, I think. Like the scene with the servants like Eumaeus, and he's talking about his experiences. I like this portrayal. It was very different, but you have this idea that he's not come to reclaim this glory.
No.
He's actually come to sort of face what's left, what he's left behind, this
Yeah.
mess that's come about since he's been away. And you almost get the sense of he's a bit unsure if he even deserves to come home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think adds a lot of complexity to his character.
Yeah, he doesn't seem convinced that he should be doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
Which really contrasts, because in the poem, when he's with Eumaeus in the hut, he's sat there plotting how he's going to bring down the suitors. Whereas that fireside scene, which I think is integral for so many different reasons, he just doesn't know what he should be doing. He doesn't refer, obviously he's still keeping himself as a secret, but when he talks about the war, you have two young sort of herdsmen there. One of them is glory, 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 isn't war glory. Another is Odysseus. No, what's he done? He's taken all these people away. He's left us, which is the sort of criticisms that Eupythes had, but you have this contrast. And there's some really tough lines. I mean, I got one here. I was able to write some of these down and have since looked them up. We burn the city down and we drown the flames in blood, because he admits that he's been there. He's at Troy, which really excites a couple of the herdsmen and elicits that, wow, wasn't it great?
Yeah.
And he's saying it's not, it was awful. And then he uses a line which apparently came from a veteran of Vietnam. And the line is, the city could not be taken, it could only be destroyed. And that was from, I don't know what city that related to in the Vietnamese War. However, that punches. Yeah. And I think it links into the point that I think most people get out of the film, that this is very much about the horrors of war. It stays with you.
Definitely.
And that is just, he is, as you say, a broken man. I don't think he even knows that he wants to be Odysseus anymore.
No. I think especially when he sees what he's left behind and the state it's in, he's quite hard on himself, I think.
Yeah. What did you make of Penelope and how they interacted?
I thought Penelope was an interesting one. I thought, to me, she's not just waiting like you sort of see in the poem. She's actually quite a stronger woman, I'd say. She's survived, she's ruled this place and endured it all. And she's not softened and crushed by time. I think, if anything, she's probably sharpened by everything that's been going on around her. And their reunion isn't this romantic or triumphant scene that I think the poem portrays. I think it's quite painful and quite emotionally weathered, I guess. And I almost get the sense that the power dynamic shifted. It's felt to me like she was questioning Odysseus more than he was reassuring her.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is a great observation, because I was trying to put my finger on where they were as a pair.
Yeah.
Because as you say, this isn't I've been waiting for you by the door with a martini.
Yeah, exactly.
This is, I don't know that I can. Who are you? The person I loved is gone. You're here now, but you're not the person I loved. And Odysseus isn't even the person. He knows this. He knows he's not the person that he was. Yeah. And that final scene was really poignant. So you have them and they're discussing how they're going to do this, how they're going to get on. And I did wonder, actually, because there's a bit of symbolism. I wasn't sure if I am overreaching here and perhaps reading something that isn't there. But he's being washed in the bath. He's being washed by Penelope, and the blood's coming off him, and because he's obviously just had his big fight. Is that him washing away who he was? But there's also a kind of pollution aspect there, because there's a whole purification thing in ancient Greece, and there are certain rites and rituals that you could perform as part of purifying someone from what was often termed miasma, or some act that wasn't particularly good. One of them was washing. The other one was travel. You have individuals traveling. You have people being exiled, people sent away. And of course, that's undertaken by Telemachus, because Telemachus just goes. Yeah. He can't be in the same place as his father now. He's been changed by it. And you just see him at the end sailing away. I didn't know if that was me just being a bit too much like a sixth form media studies student, but I did wonder if there was something there going on.
Yeah.
And that one line at the end where, and I think this sums it up beautifully, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, but we'll remember together and we'll forget together.
Yeah.
It was that whole, in many ways, for them both, the actual trial of it all is only just beginning.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought it was just interesting to present the relationship that way. It's Penelope saying, we'll get through this together, which you don't really see in, obviously, Homeric epic. You just see women just there, I guess, not
Yeah.
being that supportive personality. They're just there, whereas the film really showed her as this caring wife that has suffered a lot, but she's there supporting her husband.
And she's the one who's having to deal with everything that's going on. And and again, Juliette Binoche, fantastic actress, she does it so well because she is trying to work out how to deal with a really annoying son, because Telemachus just really annoyed me. He needed a slap. You have him, and you have the fact that she's got to marry, no pun intended, the practical situation she's in. She knows that whatever she does is going to lead to bad consequences. So she's trying to work this out. She's got people around her. You've got the maids who didn't deserve their fate, but a lot of them are being, say, disloyal, but they're obviously on the side of the suitors. People have worked out which way the wind's blowing, and it's not with Penelope. Penelope realizes the minute she marries someone, chances are Telemachus is going to disappear or be made to disappear. So she's having to deal with a lot. She's, again, I'm trying not to be a sixth form media studies student here. She's going through her Odyssey at that time. He's kind of done it, and it was obviously brutal, and he's arrived on the island. But she's still there. She's going through hers, and it's every way as challenging as Odysseus is in different ways. And she's the real support. And at the end of the film there, she really comes across as the one with the more, I wouldn't say heroic impetus, but she's got the dynamics. That if she wasn't as strong as she is, he doesn't go anywhere. It ends. It doesn't go well.
Yeah, exactly.
The only thing I was annoyed at, though, and I should add this, no geese. Penelope has her geese in the Odyssey, and she loved watching them, and I was kind of hoping for geese. Which brings me to some other points, and one of them, sad to say, Argos.
Oh, I
wasn't expecting it. I don't know why, but if you've watched the film, it's over very quickly. But he meets Argos, which I still think is one of the saddest things in any poem or any work that I've ever read. He meets his dog, but then the dog kind of lies down and just closes its eyes. And I thought that did look a bit CGI. That was an incredibly well-trained dog, because
it was still.
I can get my dog to do some things with cheese, but even if he lies on the side, then he'd just look at me, expecting more cheese. But that got me, and I wasn't expecting it until I saw him going up to a dog, and I went, "Oh, that's nice, a dog." And I could hear in my brain a voice going, "You idiot."
That's the dog.
You know what's going to happen next. I was close to breaking, but obviously I managed to hold it in.
It's not even a dramatic scene in the traditional sense. It's just that sort of
poignancy,
heartbreakingly quiet, scene that you just have to stop and sort of stop yourself crying a little bit.
This is one of the great things about what I like to try and find is the thing that connect people to the modern day. The fact that you've got a reference to a beloved dog, I'm sold.
Yeah,
that's me. I'm on that train all day. So
I think a lot of people are.
Yeah, so it is there. So if you haven't seen it, just take a handkerchief with you. You'll be fine. The violence was quite brutal. It didn't seem sort of swashbuckly in terms of, he's not jumping and leaping around the place, giving roundhouses or anything like that. It's functional. He is a veteran warrior. So when you have the two men engaging with him early on in the film, he puts them down quite quickly. And there's no sort of quips or anything like that. And there's one moment where you see it from the perspective of the downed and soon to be dead suitor, and he's looking up at Odysseus. And you have this weird thing because the sun's out behind him, and it gives him this kind of almost not halo, but sort of light around the sides of his head. And again, with my sixth form studies head on, I was thinking in the Iliad, you often have the heroes shining when they're accomplishing martial feats. And I don't know if that was just good cinematography or perhaps a link in there.
I think the scene was perfectly done, really. I don't know what you think in terms of the deaths were very quick and the scene was over pretty fast. And to me, it sort of felt like maybe Odysseus is showing how he's just emotionally hardened from this because of war.
Yeah.
He's sort of rattling off these deaths almost like it's nothing.
Yeah. There is just a function to them.
Yeah.
Well, I know it sounds a bit corny, but people talk about, a killing machine. He is.
Yeah. I mean, he spent 10 years doing it.
Yeah. Perhaps it's the only time that he feels recognizable to himself.
Yeah.
Because that's what he's done, and he can
he's
slip back into it.
Yeah.
And in terms of his physique, apparently it took 5 months of incredible work ethic. Yeah, 5 months. But he also did the whole boiled, I think he was eating only boiled fruit or something like that. When he did an interview, he did a little talk after the initial screening. He spoke about when he went to the fitness coach, he said he wanted to look like a piece of old rope. And because he said, because of sailors, that's who he is. Yeah. And he is incredibly lean. There's not an ounce of fat on him. Yeah. And you can believe that that's what someone looks like. This is not, it's an incredible physique to have, particularly at his age. But blimey, he does look, there's no CGI. He looks how he is. Like you say, he's been eaten away by his experiences. Emotionally, physically, he looks like it as well. This is not a guy who looks like he's had a fun time doing anything.
No. He's worn away. And I think because he wears that sort of ragged cloak round him for the majority of the film, I think when he finally takes that off and just starts killing, I think it's quite a dramatic, this is actually what I look like now, which I think was, he
also takes it off earlier on in the film, which did get a few, okay, we're doing that, are we? Yeah. Straight away. I apologise for this, but I did think of the scene in Life of Brian where he opens up the window, the shutters, and everyone's outside. It's just like, okay, we're going there. So there is, but I suspect if you're watching this film, you probably know what you're getting out of it. Is there any other elements to it that we've not covered? Because we have some questions, some really good questions. We had quite a few. We couldn't obviously cover all of them, but we've selected a few to answer. So thank you for submitting them. Is there anything else that you want to say or cover at all?
Not that I can think of, no. I think we've done a good job there.
Okay, so let's start with the first question. How would you describe the approach of this cinematic interpretation of the Odyssey? Did you like it? Did it work in your eyes?
Yeah, I liked it. I think it worked. I think it takes one of the most epic, divine-filled stories in literature and sort of shrinks it into a smaller scale and made it more human. Yeah. It doesn't try and impress you with grandeur and making it this big thing. It just wants you to sit and feel a bit of discomfort and show you actually this is what happens when the war ends, but the effects don't end. It worked.
I completely agree. I think again you have to manage your expectations. You're not getting a CGI Marvel's blockbuster here. You're getting a very much, I think you've said it a few times and I'm going to nick it, it's very much a human experience film. And you have lifted away the divine. The only thing I would say, I still think you could have had elements of the divine in there. And what I thought might have been an interesting angle is perhaps Odysseus perceiving that there's Athena there. So you're not sure. Yeah. So, for example, you have some stranger who just comes up and starts talking to him, but then he turns around. He's not there. No one else has seen him.
Yeah, so I like that.
Is that something from his past? Is he going through some sort of trauma? What's going on there? Not quite Fight Club in terms of they're not there, and spoiler alert on that one. But in terms of you could have had something there. And I think that even if you didn't want to do that, because again, perhaps that might take away from the direction of the film that you want to make, you could have had reference to the sort of worship and everything else. Because after all, one of the scenes does have a funeral.
Yeah.
And there is a rite and ritual being performed. So there's obviously a framework of observance there. So it's there in the background. Why not announce it a bit more by just tempering and just saying it? They're disrespecting the gods. They're doing this, but like I say, you could have had a few other options.
Yeah,
I'm really interested by this second question, by the way. Really interested in what you have to say on this one. Which character was most like who they were in the Odyssey, and who was the least like how they were in the Odyssey? Who was different from the poem? Who was very close to being how they were in the poem?
Okay, so I'll start with most. I don't know if yours is going to be the same.
Okay.
I went for Telemachus. I thought he had that perfect mix of uncertainty, not really sure what's going on, naivety, and just, a man caught between what to do, kind of unsure whether he's actually ready to step into his father's shoes. Yeah. And I thought that tension was it was well presented in the film. But But yeah, who did you think was the most?
Mine was, I thought she was brilliant in the film. I want her to have her own spin-off series, Eurycleia. Because Eurycleia, she does the recognition theme is very similar. The way she is in the scene is very similar. But boy, is she after revenge. And in poem, she's really happy. She's like skipping around the place. When she hears that he's coming back to, put a bit of butchery down on a few people, she's well up for that.
Yeah, she is.
In the poem, she says, I can go and get the maids who are disloyal. Let me. I'll do that.
Yeah.
She's in the film. She's visibly quite happy and cheery about the fact that people are going to get theirs. So I thought she was very similar.
Yeah, I like that.
You could also argue Argus as well, but I don't want to do that. Perhaps the dog could get an award. Who did you think was the least like? I mean, I think it's probably quite obvious, but for me anyway. So who did you think was the least like?
I went for Antinous. Well, in Homer's version, he's more of a villain, I thought.
Yeah,
quite arrogant and cruel and openly disrespectful and a big ringleader of the suitors. Like, he's there to be hated in my eyes, whereas I think in the Return, he's handled quite differently.
Do you feel sorry for him?
I didn't feel sorry for him, but I felt he wasn't as cruel and horrible as Homer makes him out to be.
He seemed to genuinely love or have an affection for Penelope, where all the other suitors are very much, I want this.
Yeah.
He seemed like he was in love with her and he cared for her.
Well, he doesn't come across like this brute or tyrant that you think he should be. To me, he's simply taken up a space in a world that's got no leader and is there not to steal a throne out of ambition, but because he thinks the world's moved on, Odysseus is gone.
Yeah,
I can fill that role. So yeah, I thought he was a lot calmer and more collected in the film than Homer paints him to be.
I feel really bad because I just went for Odysseus, and I thought, but yours is a far better suggestion. So I'm going to edit this to make it sound like I said Antinous, and you can say, I don't know, Argos or something. I'll do some. I'll do the magic of AI or something like that. ChatGPT. I'll do something. Anyway, that's a really good point because he is, and there is that quite sad scene where he realizes it's over.
Yeah,
and he doesn't seem bothered about losing out on becoming king or anything else. It seems like he just doesn't want to be there if he can't be with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I suppose in a way is a good contrast to Odysseus, who doesn't know if he does.
Yeah.
You've got someone who's there who looks like they genuinely have affection. And I'm sure Odysseus does in the film, but he builds towards that. But it's, as you say, he's not giving us any real intimacy with anything. In fact, I did make a note. The only thing that he is intimate, and by that I mean he shows a real emotional resonance to, are two things in the film. The first, Argus. The second is the bow. When he has the bow delivered, it really, I wouldn't say he changes, but he takes so much care about stringing it. He gets a bit, I wouldn't say creepy, but it does be like, wow, he really likes his bow. Yeah,
he's really in awe when he picks it up.
He shows more emotion to the bow than he does pretty much any other character. Yeah. Obviously, until he gets to Penelope, but as I think we both concluded, then it's going to be a built-on thing. It's not there anymore. There was one question, which was, did you cry at Argos? Which you did. I was close. I was close.
I cry at anything though, and if it's dog related, I'm gone.
Yeah, if I get any adverts on TV now for any animal sanctuaries, I'm like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm getting old and getting soft in my old age.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much all of it covered. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I've thought of one thing that
go for it.
I thought was interesting. So in terms of a scene that they didn't put in the film, that is one of my favourite scenes.
Yeah.
Is when the bard is singing about the war and you have that image of Odysseus showing emotion all of a sudden and he starts crying. I thought that would have been a really nice scene to have put into the film, especially with this man that's so emotionless.
Yeah.
To see that emotion would have really worked, but
that would have worked really well. I can't think of any scenes that I would have put in that weren't. If I had to take a scene out, it would probably be the the one involving Laertes.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to bang that drum, but I didn't quite get. I understand they have to show these individuals as inherently bad people. Do you need to do it that way? Yeah, you can, you can't. I wouldn't want to watch it again because I found it really heavy.
Yeah,
it was
I'm
one of
the
those
same.
films that a few days after, I think people have got films like this in their locker where you can think that film's really, really good, but you don't necessarily want to watch it again because it captured you. You got it, and you don't want to ride that roller coaster again.
It's stuck with you, and there.
Before we end, where can people get hold of you on social media? Obviously, myclassicsportal.co.uk, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one. But where else can they find you on social media?
So I'm on TikTok and Instagram as My Classics Portal, and I've also recently started YouTube longer form videos.
Excellent.
Again, My Classics Portal. So yeah, any of those areas you can reach me on. Yeah.
I just want to finally say thank you. Really appreciate you coming on and talking to me about everything you've been able to open my eyes to, which you have done.
Yeah, and the same.
It will be great to have you on again at some point. If you would like to hear Lottie, let me know. I will try and get her back on, and we can find other things to talk about. You can pick the subject. Perhaps it can be something that you have a close association to, something that you really enjoy talking about. Well, thanks for everyone for listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us both talk about things. And from me, thank you and take care.
Yeah, thanks for having me.